I think we'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Floyd. I am one of the co-chairs of West County Democrats. And as this is an even-numbered month, this is my month. I'm only going to, because Glenn is here to talk about legislative affairs, I'm only talking about positive things this morning, like the Electoral College is meeting today to elect Joe Biden as the 46th president of the United States. So yay! Yay! The vaccine is en route. I apparently somebody received a shot first thing this morning on TV. I know healthcare workers in the area are receiving vaccinations this week because my daughter is included as one of those. I encouraged her, go ahead, you're young, we'll see what happens, and we'll go from there. So I kind of offered up my own child as a guinea pig of sorts. But we're very glad you could be with us today. We have some fascinating speakers. I'm going to ask you, just like if we were in the Union Hall, silence your phone, mute yourself if you would, please. So we don't get a whole lot of extra noise. It's bad enough. I have a Christmas clock in the adjoining room that will play music at 11 o'clock. If I catch it fast enough, I'll mute myself, because otherwise we'll be serenaded with, I can't remember which Christmas carol. But we're very glad you're here. Let's mosey on through the agenda. You should have received the November minutes in your email. I assume there are no corrections. Any discussion about that? Can we move for those to be approved as sent out?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Okie doke. The next report is membership. Where did Gay? There's Gay. Gay would like to talk to you about,
Okay, Gay's here.
about joining back up. Go ahead, Gay.
Okay. Right now, we have 34 paid members for 2021. And again, our dues are $20 a year. And it has been difficult since we're all kind of quarantined and how to do that. Jan, our treasurer, will be talking about some other options that we're looking at. But for now, it's 34 paid members. If you want to send in a check for $20, you can mail it to our P.O. Box, West County Dems, and that's P.O. Box 31034, St. Louis 63131. And that's kind of it for my report.
The treasurer's report, we have important business to take care of with the budget for 2021. Jan, I'll let you go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to mention, follow up with Gay on the membership. The options we're looking at are Act Blue. Some of you may have donated to Act Blue for candidates before, so there will be a small percentage taken out to do that, but we need to take a day or two to get that set up. Another option, which if you pay your checks through your bank and they send out the checks and mail them for you, that's another option. You could pay us that way as well. I know a lot of people don't pay by check anymore. So, so those are two options that are available. The one immediately, you can use your bank, and the other one, we're going to take a day or two to set that up. Previously, well, I'm going to go ahead and do the December treasurer's report first. We had $5,394.73 at the end of October. We received $260 in revenue of dues during the month of November. We had $300 in expenses during the month of November for honorariums. And our ending balance was $5,354.73. Okay. And as Karen mentioned, we have the budget proposal for 2021. It should have been sent to everyone by email. Do I have a motion to approve, or do I need to go through this? Or how do you want me to do that?
I'll move that we accept the budget as presented.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, can we just raise hands or what?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thank you very much.
All righty. I was going to piggyback on something Jan said. I actually this morning set up a bill pay for West County Dems. I bank with Bank of America just to see how that worked. And I hit a glitch when it came up with phone number. I had to have a phone number. We don't have a phone number per se. So I just put in my phone number because why not? And it did work doing that way, but it said that the check would take a week to clear. So I'm curious, let me know if you see something, if we get a check or something.
Okay. Yeah, because they do,
The guinea pig.
a lot of the banks do electronic transfers. So when they have to write a check, it does take a little longer, I think. So.
Great. All right. All right. Next on our agenda, we have asked for people to come up with nominations. We normally would have done this previous for the executive board of West County Dems. We've made a couple of pleas for people to volunteer, or if you would like to be volunteered, or if you would like to nominate somebody, we're going to give you an opportunity to do that. We need, for the next cycle, we need an additional co-chair. I would remain on. We need a program chair to take Erlane's place. We need a secretary. Doris very graciously has been willing to act as secretary for the most of this year. And we need 2 board members. So if you are interested, or if there is somebody you would like to nominate for any one of those positions, I will put my email address in the chat box, and you may send those nominations to me. It's important to have new people. It's also important to have experienced people. But if you're interested, we would love for you to volunteer, or if you would like to nominate somebody else. Again, I will put my email in the chat box in a few minutes, and you may send those to me directly. And we'll give you a week to come up with that. Okay, it's actually not been as labor intensive as I had imagined. And it's really been a good experience for me. So if you would like to join us on the executive board, we would love to have you. So just keep that in mind. Eventually we'll be meeting back in person, and we won't see little people in little rectangles on a computer screen. So that will be great. Okay, next we have the program report from Erlane.
It's getting worse.
You with us?
Yes, I'm sorry, I
Okay.
had to unmute. All right, well, I have collected a list of people from our metro area who are experts in the field of political science, community relations, journalism, so on. Some of them have been referred because we've heard them speak. Others have published in local media or appeared on local television. And so I am, while we're waiting to see if somebody comes forward and nominates somebody for vice chair in charge of programming, I am going ahead and working on that because obviously we need speakers queued up so that we can have interesting meetings, as I'm sure today's will be. So that's pretty much the update for that.
Okay. If you have any suggestions for the program committee as it is, please.
Dennis
forward
Lavley here. I have a suggestion.
Oh, okay.
Michael Butler, the Recorder of Deeds in the city of St. Louis, was just elected chair of the Missouri Democratic Party. So he's clearly local if we were physical, but even if not, being virtual, I think it might be nice at some point in an earlier month to get some sort of report from Michael Butler on his view of the party and where we're going and that sort of a thing as a speaker.
Excellent idea. I am jotting that down, and I did get an email introducing the new people from Lauren Gepford that may others of you may also have received. Thank you.
Else? All right, Glenn is with us. I mentioned as we were logging on this morning, I made it a point to look up the word sedition this morning because I was trying to figure out what to do with Ann Wagner. Apparently she could be convicted of a felony. So that's
Not
frightening.
just Ann Wagner. All 6 of Missouri's Republican members of Congress signed the petition or signed the brief in support of the crazy Texas lawsuit. So as bad as Ann Wagner is, she wasn't the only one. All 6 of them did. So that, remember that 6 people basically are following the playbook set up in 1936 by the National Socialist Party in Germany, where basically if your guy doesn't win, the vote doesn't count. So the Republican Party of Missouri, we can honestly say, is now reverting to 1936 Nazi politics. Speaking of which, Donald Trump has pretty much redefined truth for a large portion of the population. A recent Missouri Scout Remington poll found that 73% of Missouri Republicans agree with the statement that Donald Trump won the election but was cheated out of his victory. 73% of Missouri Republicans. Nationwide, 40% of Republicans agree with a similar statement, and 23% of Republicans nationwide say they don't know who won the election. So basically, 2/3 of Republicans do not agree with what happened in November. Keep that in mind. Congress, meanwhile, remains broken. Despite intense need, the best the House and the Senate could do last week was to buy themselves one more week before a government shutdown. The federal budget year started October 1st. Nancy Pelosi is now saying she'll keep the House in session through the Christmas holidays if she has to, trying to get a budget deal in place. The problem again and again on both the budget and the stimulus is the Senate, and in the Senate, the problem is Mitch McConnell. There are many people in Washington saying they cannot envision Mitch McConnell agreeing to anything until at least after the election in Georgia on January 5th, or perhaps even after the inauguration. He does not want to make Trump look bad, and he does not want to give the Republicans or the Democrats anything that looks like a victory prior to that Georgia election for control of the Senate. So basically, one man from Kentucky is holding America hostage right now. Remember, the recession caused by the pandemic is going to be with us for a while. As Cindy can probably tell you, at Circle of Concern, demand peaked after the 2008-2009 recession in 2010. Food stamp use peaked in 2010. People, when they first lose their job, they have savings, they have unemployment. As those run out, we're going to see a lot of people get to a lot more economic hurt. And that's probably going to mean a very, very weak spring and summer. There's hope that there'll be another stimulus once we get the Biden administration in. The question is, how well will the states go along with it? Another thing to remember, Donald Trump has never given up on his efforts to destroy the federal government from within. You may have read about some of the changes in the Department of Defense, putting very unqualified people into senior positions. Similar things are going on all across the government. Plus, there are many positions, undersecretary level positions, that have never been filled during the 4 years of Trump's tenure. Where he does put people in, they tend to do his bidding. For example, in EPA and USDA and places like that, we have seen a lot of regulations reversed. We've seen a lot of backroom changes to things like with food stamps and the WIC program. Unfortunately, that's not going to get any better until after the new administration comes in. One thing to remember too, the state of Missouri depends on the federal government for more than 1/3 of its income. So if the federal government isn't doing its job, and if the federal government has a close down, that really hurts the state of Missouri's cash flow, because Missouri depends so much on the money that comes in for Medicaid, for food stamps, for transportation, and so on. So if there's a government shutdown, Missouri will feel the impact very quickly. The big thing going on in Jeff City this week is stupidity. Right this week, we have another session in the endless special session. Some of you may get Sarah Unsinger's emails. Sarah was very upset because today the Missouri House of Representatives is going to take up a resolution from Representative Justin Hill of Lake St. Louis to support the Texas attempt to overturn the election. Every day the special session is in place and the legislators come to Jeff City. It costs $120.80 per legislator for their per diem. You add in the other staff costs and the upkeep costs, the conservative estimate is that it costs $20,000 a day for a day of session in Missouri above normal cost. What that means is Missouri is going to spend at least $20,000 to support a resolution that has no legal impact for an issue that's already been tossed aside by the U.S. Supreme Court. That's called governing in the Republican Party. Also in Missouri, most of Missouri's income comes from two things: the state income tax, individual income tax, and sales tax. Missouri is especially vulnerable in an economic downturn. People lose their jobs, they're not paying as much income tax, and they're not shopping as much. Already, the Missouri General Assembly and the governor have said that they expect revenue in the next fiscal year, starting in July, to be about $400 million below what it was this fiscal year. And this fiscal year wasn't a very good one. The only thing saving Missouri this year was the federal money. It is very possible, since we cannot have tax increases in Missouri, that we're going to see major cuts in services. And the biggest places to make cuts in Missouri normally are Medicaid and education, because those are the two biggest consumers of general revenue. This year, the legislature has to implement Medicaid expansion, but a lot of us are going to have to keep our eyes on them to make sure they really do it and they really support it. If not, there's already talk of saving money on Medicaid by cutting reimbursements to medical providers, by getting very tight on what drugs are allowed, and other things, trying to hold down the cost, but also to make Medicaid so unappealing to make it that people who even qualify for it won't bother getting it because it won't do anything for them. That's going to be a big fight this coming year. Of course, being the Missouri legislature, they've already filed over 400 bills in the House and a couple hundred in the Senate. We have some of our perennial favorites. Right to work is back in the hopper. The Guns Everywhere bill is back. This year, a new version of Machine Guns for All is being proposed as a change to how Missouri interprets the Second Amendment to the Constitution. They would basically say in Missouri is that since we have a right to have guns, we have a right to have any guns. So if you would like to have a machine gun, or if you want to get a 75 millimeter cannon to harass your neighbors, we might make it possible this year. Also, the big thing, we've had great success on petition drives. And so there are a number of bills to make it harder for petitions to be brought before voters and be enacted. For one thing, instead of needing a set number of voters in just 6 congressional districts out of 8, you would need to have a higher percentage of voters in all 8 congressional districts. Also, the threshold for passing a constitutional amendment, they're talking about going from a simple majority to a supermajority. Clean Missouri in 2018 would have made it. But some of the other things that have been done by initiative petition would have fallen short, such as the minimum wage increase, would have probably fallen short of that supermajority they're talking about imposing. The other thing is, we all know Andrew Koenig likes tax cuts. And even though, as I mentioned, Missouri is looking at a loss in revenue, even though Missouri's median family income and other indicators are very weak, and even though there is absolutely no correlation between what your state tax rate is and how many jobs you attract to the state, there, once again, there's a big movement to further cut tax revenue in Missouri. So we could see more cuts to the individual income tax, more cuts to the corporate income tax. Also, remember, we have never accepted the internet sales tax money from the Wayfair provision. Once again, there is a movement to say if we accept that money, we have to reduce the personal income tax rate by a like amount. In other words, no net gain, even though this is sales tax money provided by Missourians into that internet sales tax compact. So we're looking at another typical year of the Missouri legislature. The one tax increase they are talking about is a fuel tax increase, but don't worry, that won't happen because it'll have to go to the voters in 2022, even if they do enact it in the House and Senate. And the Republicans have spent a generation telling Missourians the problem is not taxes, the problem is Missouri spends too much. The problem for Republicans when they do propose something like a tax increase for transportation, the people they've been talking to for a generation listen to them and vote it down. So Missouri will probably bring to a debate a fuel tax increase. There's a chance it will pass in the House and the Senate with a lot of arm twisting, but don't worry, it'll fail in 2022. Last thing, I was talking to some people last week about COVID. At the national level, there's a lot of concern about how the states pull themselves back together after COVID. The one thing these experts from around the country agreed upon was that Missouri will be one of the last states to get clear of the virus because we have weak state leadership. We don't have mask mandates. We don't have enforcement of mandates very well in the areas where we have the mandates. And plus we have a lot of people who don't believe the virus is real. There's a lot of people who do not report it when they're sick or do not stay home when they're sick. You add all that together with the anti-vax movement, and you're probably going to see a situation where Missouri is one of the last few states where the virus is thriving in 2022 or 2023. Now, I'm sorry I don't have any better news, but that's where we're standing right now. We are still in a situation. We are going to have Republican supermajorities in the House and Senate again, and we have a Republican governor. So we are going to have another rough year out of Jeff City. In Washington, we keep our fingers crossed and hope that there's a couple of good elections in Georgia and we can start changing things in Washington. Any questions?
There's one in the chat box. Can Texas really secede?
Technically, they probably could, but it would be so hard. And if you want to see how hard it gets, look at what's going on right now with the United Kingdom and Brexit. They're not even sure they're going to be able to get truckloads of fresh produce into London in 2 weeks. So there's a lot of problems there. I am hoping there are a few intelligent people in Texas who would not let this happen. But theoretically, it's possible, but boy, would it be stupid.
The question asked whether Texas could succeed, not secede, which I assume meant their lawsuit. But that already failed. So
that failed. But remember, technically, Texas has a special case. The way Texas was annexed into the United States is different than the way other territories were promoted to statehood. And so Texas, it gets a little cloudy. 1840s law is a little bit different than 21st century law.
right, the question is, are we talking about seceding from the Union or succeeding in their lawsuit?
They will not succeed in their lawsuit. They've already failed in that.
I know, but that's what the question asked, I believe.
Yes, but they could theoretically start the nation of Texas, which would have a very interesting set of problems.
Any other questions for Glenn? Okay.
Thank you, and hopefully the news will be better. Next month, we'll be meeting right before the inauguration.
Okay. All righty. Thank you, Glenn. Oh, okay. Elaine, would you like to make the introduction?
Yes, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Anita Manion. She's an assistant professor in science at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. She has an MBA and a Master of Management from Fontbonne and a PhD in Public Policy Analysis from St. Louis U. She teaches a number of courses in American politics, public policy, gender policy, etc. She focuses a lot of her research on the impact public policy with economic inequality, which has been a big topic in recent times about the spread between the haves and have-nots. And right now it's especially interesting since many wealthy people are only becoming more wealthy in the pandemic area, while other people are having even a rougher time. She's received the recipient, she's the recipient of the 2019 Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching and the 2020 Excellence in Civic Engagement Award, and a previous speaker of ours, Dr. Terry Jones, recommended her highly. I'll turn the meeting over to her now.
Hi, thanks for having me today. So my plan for today is I put together some slides that I was just going to sort of walk through. What can we expect with, thankfully, the Electoral College vote happening today, and what can we expect to happen after January 20th with the new Biden administration, and what challenges are they facing? So I'm going to share my screen, just kind of run through some slides and some public opinion polling. You guys have already touched on some of the points I was going to get at today, but I mainly want to leave lots of time for Q&A. So please, this is very informal, but I'm going to go ahead and, oh, could you please enable my screen sharing? I'm sure that Terry gave you a very excellent election debrief at your last meeting. I still can't share my screen. Okay, now I can. And it looks like someone's in the waiting room. Okay, so sharing my screen, I'm just going to kind of cover some of the topics, and these aren't linear topics because they're all interconnected, but some of the topics I thought we could discuss today are: what are the Biden-Harris administration's priorities? Where do we stand with the cabinet nominations? What the heck is going on with Congress, and how will that affect the Biden-Harris administration's ability to implement their policy priorities? And what might this transition look like? So their stated top 4 priorities for the incoming administration are combating COVID-19, economic recovery, racial equity, and climate change. When it comes to COVID-19, we know that this has subsumed pretty much everything in our lives in 2020. When I think back on 2020, I say, so I'm also serve as the political analyst for KSDK News. And at the beginning of 2020, the big story that was taking up all of my time and that we were talking about on air was impeachment. Like, can anyone remember back to impeachment? It seems like a million years ago. So 2020 has, been a roller coaster ride, and really, the story of the year is obviously COVID-19. The 3 priorities that Joe Biden has stated for addressing COVID-19 are vaccines, which today was a landmark day. My partner is also a healthcare provider at St. Mary's Hospital and will be getting the vaccine in the next couple of weeks. So vaccines, the issue here is that the federal government will get vaccines to the states, but then the states are in charge after that. And we've seen sort of that federalism approach throughout this COVID crisis with varying results. Sometimes we need a stronger federal government and an administration who believes in science to help us with this. So this is a big challenge that the Biden administration will be facing, taking over the logistics of this. We are already having shortages with healthcare workers, with the hospitalizations spiking. And you can see the hospitalizations on the graph there. And so we also need healthcare workers who can provide immunizations. Biden says that he wants 100 million doses in arms in his first 100 days. So vaccines are one of his top priorities. Also says that there would be a 100-day mask mandate, and that reopening schools would be his 3rd COVID-19 priority. But to get those things done, you also need funding. And as we know, Congress is a deadlock when it comes to this funding. So state and local governments can have the logistical ability to deliver these vaccinations. So schools can do the testing and things that they need, and we can get teachers vaccinated. So those are issues. I just got a pop-up that there's someone in the waiting room. So you might want to check that. And then Biden will also, day 1, rejoin the World Health Organization. Another difference in the Biden approach, we know that President Trump hasn't attended a COVID task force meeting in over 5 months. And President Biden will also have a COVID-19 equity task force as part of that, because we've seen the disparate impacts that COVID-19 has had on different populations. To get these things done, to get people vaccinated, to get parents willing to send their students to school and teachers willing to go into classrooms, we have to have faith in science and faith in the administration. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that the incoming president will face. If we look at where we stand regarding a mask mandate right now, Missouri, of course, is one of the states that has no mask mandate. And the gray states currently have one. So even though you could say, well, look at all the states that have one. We'll take, for example, Michigan. We've seen the backlash that happens in some of these states. And certainly the Biden administration, if they try to impose a mask mandate, will face some of that. This is recent polling that happened December 1st through 6th. Due to the coronavirus, do you think that a national mask mandate is a good idea, a bad idea, or unsure? So the green lines are folks who think it's a good idea. The good news for Biden is 73% of Americans responded that they think that a mask mandate is a good idea. Only about 51% say a stay-at-home order is a good idea. But then when we divide that out by political affiliation, we see this huge gap with almost all Democrats saying they think a national mask mandate is a good idea, less than half of Republicans saying that, and about 3/4 of independents supporting a national mask mandate. A few other ways to look at it are, the next area would be the vaccine. And I'm sure that you've heard some of the polling on this, but where we see some people saying they're willing to get the vaccine, here we see that people, while they might be interested in getting the vaccine, they're nervous to be among the first who get the vaccine. And that has even been among healthcare workers. There's a concern about being among the first. I asked my partner if his colleagues are intending on getting the vaccine, and he's done some informal polling around St. Mary's Hospital, and it's a mixed bag. And so you can understand why, particularly you see here, certain communities like the African-American community might be hesitant to trust in government when it comes to getting what they might view as an experimental vaccine. And as a population who's already suffered disproportionately from COVID-19 and who has historic experience with, the government experimenting with them when it comes to health issues, you can see why there's going to be a big challenge in getting ambassadors to these different communities and getting buy-in. So even if we get the vaccine doses, we have the infrastructure to administer them, we have to convince people that it's safe, that it's effective, that it's the right thing to do. Women are more skeptical than men of the vaccine. Older people have said they are more likely to get it than younger people. Democrats, 69% say that they would get it, while Republicans only 50%, and people with higher levels of income and education are more likely to say they would get it. But we know that people with lower levels of income and communities of color are being hit very hard by this virus. So this is going to be, again, an important messaging strategy, not just top down and not just evidence, but really getting in communities, having faith leaders and others convince people that this is safe and that they should do this. So part of the problem of having faith in science is having faith in actually our administration, that they were duly elected in a free and fair election. And I know there were some statistics quoted earlier, but this was again a poll December 1st through 6th. And they were asked, do you trust the results of the 2020 election are accurate? Overall, only 61% of Americans say that they trust the results are accurate. To me, this is the most scary thing that we're looking at right now. While we have 95% of Democrats trusting in the results of the election, only 24% of Republicans are trusting in the results of the election, and just about 2/3 of independents. So if we have folks who don't even believe that the administration was fairly elected, they're coming into a nearly impossible situation. So when it comes to things like convincing people to get vaccinated or convincing people that the elections were fair, even though we see lawsuit after lawsuit being shot down by conservative judges, by liberal judges, by states that are run by Republicans, that in the face of evidence, folks still don't change their mind. And how can we change that? And why is the president continuing with this narrative? Part of it is certainly his ego and his unwillingness to say he's lost anything ever, including like an Emmy Award or anything else, including the 2016 election, which he won and still claims there was all this illegal voting because he's mad he didn't win the popular vote. And so another motivation the president has for all of these fraudulent claims that are undermining democracy is fundraising. We know that he's at least $450 million in debt that is coming due soon. And since election day, you can see the red line is fundraising from Trump's committees and the blue line is fundraising from Biden's. So Donald Trump is using these claims of fraudulent elections to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. The last figure I saw is since the election, he's raised about $210 million. So that is certainly a motivation for him to keep up this rhetoric that is really undermining, but this president doesn't seem to have concern for country. He has concern for his own self-interest. And so far, this has been in his financial interest to make these claims. I put this on here because 538 had these graphs on their website and sort of talking about how it doesn't matter if we have facts. Once people are held on to one of these false narratives, one of these conspiracy theories, it's really hard to change hearts and minds. If we look at the birtherism conspiracy, which was forwarded by Donald Trump, you can see that in August 2009, 25% of people thought that Barack Obama was not born in the US. Those numbers stayed remarkably stable over time. So 2 years later, these people are still convinced of the same scenario. Then we have the fact that Obama released his long-form birth certificate and said, let's just put this to bed. After he did that, the numbers went down a little and then climbed right back up. So providing the evidence that had been called for of a long form birth certificate ultimately didn't change the minds of folks. Then finally, when Donald Trump was running for president, he finally admitted in September 2016 that Obama was born in the United States. Even that didn't change minds. So I am concerned about how we are going to convince a third of our population that the election was legitimate, how we're going to convince 2/3 of our population that these vaccines are safe. When we look at these fraudulent election concerns, as was mentioned, 2/3 of congressional Republicans signed on to these ridiculous lawsuits. Only 27 congressional Republicans have publicly acknowledged that Joe Biden won the election. And in addition to the fundraising and the unwillingness to say that you lost and laying the groundwork for a 2024 election possibly, this is also laying the groundwork for further voter suppression laws. And, you know, all of the undermining of mail-in voting and other things that are happening right now, I suspect is laying the groundwork for further voter suppression laws in a lot of these states. And we're already seeing the political violence that is resulting from this. And you've probably seen this tweet from the Arizona Republican Party that said, "I'm willing to give my life for this fight." And they said, "He is, are you?" We saw the violence that happened at protests over the weekend. So these are some of my strongest concerns of a false narrative that the current president is stoking and is going to be a real challenge for the Biden administration to come into. Another priority for the Biden administration is economic recovery, obviously interwoven with COVID issues and also interwoven with climate change, because President-elect Biden sees the economic recovery is a real opportunity to work on issues of equity, issues of COVID, and issues of climate change. So certainly one of the top priorities is a COVID relief bill that would include direct payments and continued unemployment benefits and funds to states and schools to get schools reopened. He's also pledged that a recovery would include big investments in clean energy and would create over 1 million union jobs. One of the proposals that President-elect Biden has made is to give parents a tax credit of $3,000 per child age 6 to 17-year-old and $3,600 per child under 6. An issue that came up a lot on the campaign trail are Joe Biden's proposed tax policies. So estimates are that under Biden's tax plan by 2021, the top 1% of taxpayers would see their after-tax income reduced by 11.3%. The top 5% would see it shrink by 1.3%. The 90th to 95th percentile would see it reduced by 0.2%. So sort of a progressive tax increase there. The middle class aren't likely to see a change. Biden has said that he will not increase taxes on anyone making under $400,000. And he also supports a plan that would increase the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. The vice president has stated, among other initiatives, that these tax increases would be used to help increase Social Security payments, to raise the percentage of the federal poverty line of those payments, to also help with survivors' benefits. Other issues for economic recovery, President Biden has proposed for giving $10,000 of all federal student loans, and for making public college free for families that earn less than $125,000. Those are issues of his economic recovery and also issues that he's proposed as part of a racial equity initiative. He's proposed raising minimum wage to $15 an hour and making combating climate change a focus of their economic strategy. When it comes to combating climate change, President-elect Biden has said he will rejoin the Paris Climate Accord on day one, and said that he will take a whole of government approach to climate change, that you don't just have a department that looks in that. It's not just the EPA's job, that this is a national security issue, that it's an economic issue, it's an equity issue, it's a housing issue, that it's something that all government needs to be involved in. He's created a new cabinet level position called the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, and John Kerry is the appointee for that position. He's also said that he'll weave efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and accelerate green energy production into economic stimulus legislation. And also one area that it's possible will be bipartisan support on is the infrastructure bill. So trying to get clean energy into that as well. Also looking at using regulatory powers to advance a clean energy agenda, expand tax credits for wind and solar power. As it stands, the Trump administration has repealed or weakened 125 environmental regulations, including protections for endangered species, environmental risk assessments that had to be done for infrastructure projects, and his open protected wilderness for fossil fuel development and logging. So those are all things that a Biden administration could reverse. And then the fourth pillar is racial equity. Right off the bat, something that the Biden administration is doing that is diametrically opposed to what the Trump administration is doing is recognizing that there is systemic racism, that racial equity is a crisis that our country faces and that needs to be addressed. One pillar of Biden's racial equity plan is a housing equity plan. When we look at gaps in wealth, a big issue is home ownership and home values in different neighborhoods. So part of the housing equity plan would include a refundable tax credit of up to $15,000 for first-time home buyers to help combat racial inequality in housing markets. Also, a commitment to construct 1.5 million homes and public housing units, and the elimination of some regulations that can perpetuate discrimination in the housing markets. He's also asking the Federal Reserve to add to their core mandate the goal of targeting persistent racial gaps in jobs, wages, and wealth. So to make this an issue for the Federal Reserve to also consider and deal with. Also, criminal justice reforms to reduce incarceration and support for police reform legislation. This is tricky because we have over 18,000 different police departments across the country, and ultimately, they're very autonomous, but there could be police reform legislation that includes a nationwide ban on chokeholds, stopping the transfer of weapons of war to police forces, improving oversight and accountability to create a model of use of force standard, and creating a national police oversight commission. So those are some of the principles that the Biden-Harris administration have said they're committed to in a congressional police reform legislation. Something else that I think that we will be likely to see a return to in the Biden administration that we saw the Trump administration pretty much completely forego is having the Department of Justice investigate police departments to do consent decrees. Basically, when Jeff Sessions was Attorney General, he said we're not doing that anymore. And also to investigate voter suppression, which they've also all but forgone. So who is Biden putting in his cabinet and what does that tell us? So far, the Biden nominees are career officials. They're recognized experts in their field. I saw someone refer to it as delightfully boring. So sort of a return to normalcy. A lot of folks who worked with the Obama-Biden administration. Biden has said going into the situation our country's in right now, one of his priorities is to have appointees who are crisis tested, who've been dealt with the economic crisis that the Obama-Biden administration walked into, who dealt with SARS or other public health crises. So those are the types of folks he's trying to appoint in a historically diverse cabinet. He's also made a commitment to diversity in his appointees. So I think an example of intersecting priorities for the Biden administration is, for example, his nominees for Treasury Secretary, which is Janet Yellen, would be a historic first, a woman in that position. She's experienced, she's helped with the economic crisis and oversaw economic growth. And also, she, the National Economic Council Director, and the nominee for the Office of Management Budget have all emphasized a focus on climate change in their priorities and also in equity in their priorities. So they have powers to do things like requiring public companies to disclose their climate risks and greenhouse gas emissions. They can create policies and regulations that incentivize banks and financial industries to invest in clean energy and away from fossil fuels, which is the opposite of what the Trump administration was doing. So I think when we talk about this whole of government approach, this is an example of how the Treasury, the Economic Council, the Office of Management and Budget, the Federal Reserve would be working on issues of equity and climate change, as well as economic issues. This is a photograph of Biden's cabinet picks so far. You can see it certainly is a much more diverse cabinet. This is Trump's original cabinet appointees. Very white, very male, 4 women, and I think 3 people of color. This is Biden's so far. A lot of tried and trusted names, experts in their field, historically diverse appointments, but some controversies in there. Particularly, we've heard some concern over the defense secretary, the fact that he's not a civilian. And so there's a bit of pushback there. And also the other controversial one would be the agriculture secretary. So there's, nothing is without controversy. And then from the Republican side, they would say the Office of Management and Budget Director nominee is the one that they've had the most backlash to so far. A strong opponent of President Trump, and also worked for Hillary Clinton. So they have some objection to her. The tricky thing is some of these do not have to be confirmed by the Senate, but most of them do. So like all the cabinet positions would have to be confirmed by the Senate, which makes it important for the Biden team, even though he's trying to put people maybe who are more progressive, but assuming that there is a Republican control in the Senate, they have to be confirmable, which is challenging. I think the biggest appointment right now that everyone is waiting to see is the Attorney General selection. Reporting says that Biden has it narrowed down to these 4 finalists. Former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick. He has experience heading the Civil Rights Division during the Clinton administration. Outgoing Alabama Senator Doug Jones. He did successfully prosecute 2 members of the KKK that were responsible for the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham. Federal Appeals Court Judge Merrick Garland, seen here when he was being nominated for the Supreme Court, of course, which Mitch McConnell did not allow a hearing on, and former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates. Thus far, we've seen civil rights groups really pushing to have either an African-American hold this position, which Deval Patrick would be the only person on the short list that would meet that qualification. But they've also given positive feedback about Sally Yates because she does have experience under the Obama administration working on civil rights issues for the Department of Justice. So we'll see. I would tend to think it would be one of those 2, but we shall see. All of the things that I've been talking about that Biden says he wants to get done, there is a list of them that could be done through executive action, regulation, and we'll take a look at a few of those things. But primarily, and particularly if it takes funding, you have to pass it through Congress. This is going to present a real challenge for the Biden administration. This is the first time a Democratic president is going to come into office without majorities in the Senate and the House, because at best they're going to have a 50-50 split in the Senate. Since Grover Cleveland. And we know that the Democrats lost 10 seats in the House, so it's a much more narrow margin. As you can see here on the right, there are still 2 disputed races that are basically a tie in Iowa and New York, so there's some recounts and lawsuits happening there. But overall, the Democrats have lost. They went from 232 to 222 seats in the House. We know that we don't have House constituency that all agrees on everything. We have splintering between moderates and progressives sometimes. So you can't lose many votes in the House. And in the best case scenario for the Democrats, if they win both seats in Georgia in the Senate, they would have a 50-50 split with Harris casting the tie-breaking vote, which means you couldn't lose a single senator. So you would have to get, your most conservative senator and your most liberal senator to agree on anything that you passed. So this is a challenge. This is also, I think, an opportunity for some of the moderates, both Republicans and Democrats, to come together and sort of flex their muscle to get some more moderate or bipartisan things passed. But it does mean that some of that big sweeping legislation that progressives were hoping maybe a Biden administration might dip their toes into are probably unlikely, at least until maybe after the midterm elections, if something would shift. Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, does have the opportunity to take action through executive action. So Donald Trump, in recent years, has the record for this. He averaged 51 executive actions per year during his administration, in contrast to Obama, who had 35 and was widely criticized by Republicans for his executive actions. Bush had 36 per year, and Clinton had 46 per year. Two things that Biden has said he will do right off the bat is repeal the travel ban for Muslim majority countries and reinstate DACA. He also said that basically he will roll back to everything Donald Trump has done through executive action. So the power of executive action is you can do it autonomously. The downside is the next person can undo everything that you did. Some of the other things that Biden has said he'll do through executive action is putting methane pollution limits, developing new fuel economy standards, appliance and building efficiency standards, changing the refugee cap. So this is something that Donald Trump did that was dramatic. Obama had a 110,000 person ceiling for annual refugees into the country. Trump decreased that to 15,000. Biden has promised that he'll raise that to 125,000 and then increase it from there. One of the things that progressives like Elizabeth Warren and even Chuck Schumer have argued that Joe Biden can and should do with executive action is forgiving student loan debt. There are policy and legal experts who say he could do this. This is within his purview, since 92% of student debt is through the federal government, that he could forgive student loan debt. They have requested $50,000 in forgiveness. Joe Biden has said that he supports $10,000 in student loan forgiveness, but has basically indicated he doesn't think he should do that through executive action. He thinks Congress should do that. So I think that's something that progressives might push him on. And Biden recently said in a meeting that some progressive Democrats are urging executive actions that are way beyond the bounds of a president's legal authority. I think this is an example of one that seemingly is not beyond the president's authority, but it might be beyond what an institutionalist like Joe Biden is comfortable with. So this statement to me indicates that he might not make as big sweeping changes with executive action as some progressives are hoping. President Trump, so in this transition area, certainly one of the things Trump is doing is fundraising, protecting his ego, wielding his power. But there's the issue of him being in danger too, from and his family and his close associates from lawsuits. And so there's lots of talk of what he will do with the pardon power between now and January 20th. Actually, Trump, while he has used executive actions a lot, he's not issued a lot of pardons so far. And when I say pardons, I'm kind of talking about clemency, so lumping in pardons and commutations of sentences. But he hasn't used it that much so far, but presidents often in the last month, sort of in their lame duck time, use that to really exercise their pardon power when the political backlash doesn't matter to them as much. And so these are the percent of pardons that presidents did in the last fiscal year of their presidency. And you can see for Obama, for Clinton, for Bush, it was a big part that they did in the last part of their presidency. Obama, he, in the very end of his presidency, issued clemency for lots of nonviolent drug offenders. And so that's what a big part of his was. Clinton did like 100 pardons in one day at the end of his presidency. He also pardoned his brother and a major donor, which were controversial. So it's not, and both of the Bushes made some controversial pardons. So it's not new for a president to make some political pardons, but the way that Trump has and has not used his pardon power, which is largely an unlimited power, has been unusual. Only 5 of Trump's pardons didn't have a personal or political connection to him and went through the traditional DOJ clearing process. This pardon power is really thought in its inception that it was used as like a check on the judiciary, and or even a check on the legislature when you think about three strikes you're outlaws and other things. So it's a time that the president can try to right wrongs that were done in that system. And there's a Department of Justice clearing process to do that. That's not how Trump has used it. He has used it almost strictly for personal or political gain. So the pardon power pardons for federal crimes, but not for state crimes. And he and his family are still facing lots of investigations. I've listed some of them here. I'm not going to read them to you, but in New York, in Washington, D.C., in Maryland, he and his family face lots of legal obstacles and potential prosecutions. And this has raised the issue, and Trump has made the statement himself, of preemptive pardons. So could he pardon his children, his son-in-law, Rudy Giuliani, and others who have not yet been charged with a crime, but it's likely that they committed crimes during his administration, and he could. There is a history of preemptive pardons, such as Ford pardoning Nixon, such as Carter pardoning draft dodgers, so people who had not yet been charged, but sort of providing a preemptive pardon. So that has happened before, and there's likely nothing that could stop the president from preemptively pardoning his children, his son-in-law, Giuliani, whomever else he would want to. Now, there is sort of an admission with guilt of accepting a pardon, which some people have said, don't pardon me because I don't want that. And it would only pardon them from federal crimes. So all these other state and local prosecutions, it would not protect them from. There's also been a question of, can the president pardon himself? He has certainly asserted that he can. That is something that's never been tried. So he could assert the pardon power, and then it would be challenged in courts, and it would be for them to decide. But something he could do is step down 2 days before the election. Now you have President Pence, who certainly would have the power to preemptively pardon Donald Trump. So that is a possibility. We shall see, but I expect to see a flurry. You know, we saw the Roger Stone and Michael Flynn pardons, and I would expect to see others, maybe Paul Manafort, others, as well as preemptive pardons from Donald Trump. So today we are watching the Electoral College vote. Last I looked, I think there was 41-7 votes certified so far. So that was before I started talking, but those votes are literally coming in as we speak. And I'm hopeful that, I'm not confident, but I hope that our, Republican leadership, a lot of them have been saying, well, let the process play out. We'll wait till it's official. The Electoral College makes it official, not the media. And so I'm curious to see who we're going to see after today come out and acknowledge that our democratic process was free and fair, and that Joe Biden was our duly elected president. So I'm not particularly optimistic about that, but I am waiting to see who will make that assertion. So I'll go ahead and stop there, and I'm interested to hear your questions or other things you might have. Comments?
Well, I'm checking out the chat box. Here's an interesting question. What are the prospects for any consideration of the proposal to not seat GOP members of Congress who supported the Texas Supreme Court suit?
I don't see that happening. There's talk of this stuff, but for one, I don't think a Biden administration is going to be supportive of really anything that is seeking retribution on anything that came from the Trump administration. I think there might be some more liberal members of Congress who, might want to censor folks, or I just don't think that you're going to have the support you need for that to happen.
That's what I was afraid of. I have another question. What is the Biden administration likely to do about the fracking issue? Also, any insight into appointments in Missouri such as U.S. attorney?
The fracking issue, I think this is a line that Biden very clearly was trying to walk during the campaign. So he's said that he would not end all fracking. He would not put a ban on it, but that he will, I think, try to continue to narrow it. So I think that as we re-enter the Paris Climate Accords, that this is something that he's going to be thinking about. I think that, you know, we've seen Kamala Harris take stands against fracking, but I think that Biden will take a more middle of the road approach. I wouldn't expect to see any big fast action on banning fracking. I think that that might be part of his economic and climate change agenda, is like a phasing out and some incentives to redirect those financial investments and regulations to make fracking more difficult, but I don't see a broad ban going into place anytime soon. And then the other question was about appointments from Missouri.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I am actually not sure about that. I'm not sure, honestly, as far as what appointments that we might see from Missouri. Probably not cabinet level positions, but yeah, maybe other like deputy positions or other positions, which are really important. And I think that that's something that civil rights organizations and others are trying to emphasize. It's not just the, you know, cabinet level position that matters. It's the deputy secretaries who carry out so much. And it's also those second and third tier positions that help groom people for those cabinet level positions in the future. So those appointments are really important as well.
Okay, the next question has a lot to unpack in it.
Okay.
Considering the fact-free conspiracy theories that Trump supporters believe, how do we have rational conversations with these folks about policy moving forward? How do you recommend we encourage pulling our friends and family back from this self-destructive lunacy?
I think that is the $1 million question. And
Yeah.
it's something that, you know, we're all trying to think about. It's my students, this is like their biggest question. Last week was finals week and we did some Zooms to conclude. And this is what they wanted to talk about as well. How do we, and you know, that's why I try to get at even with like the birtherism, in the face of facts of a birth certificate of even the person who purported this conspiracy theory, Donald Trump, finally sort of dismissing it. Still no change of hearts and minds. I think, you know, obviously social media is a part of it, and cable news and talk radio, that we all can get in our bubbles, not just conservatives, but where we get in an echo chamber. I have been frightened lately of when folks are getting fact checked, you know, the little bar on Facebook saying this is fraudulent information. They're saying, well, I'm going to Parler now. And to me, that is just further insulating folks into a fact-free reality and an echo chamber. So that's not optimism, I guess, that's pessimism and concern. I think that it's likely that Trump and his family will join some sort of media situation and continue to propagate, you know, their lies. Just being out of office isn't going to stop that for folks who support him. So when it comes to engaging others, the research shows us that evidence and facts aren't what's going to change hearts and minds. That if people, you know, buy into this, and I almost think of it as an evolution of, yeah, we had maybe red team, blue team, and people were dug into their teams, but now it's almost like a religious fervor. It's unquestioning devotion. And when we see recent polling, people were more committed to their political party, and this would be true for Democrats and Republicans, found more alliance there than even for their own gender or their own race or their own socioeconomic class. And so this has really just become something that's really hard to break through on. What some research does show us that can be effective is not presenting arguments in our own framework. So for example, if you're talking about the environment, values that liberals might have might include things like equity. And then you look at values that conservatives might have, and it's things like freedom and tradition. And so if you can frame things in a way that resonates with quote unquote the other side's values, that has been shown to be more effective in those conversations. So I can send you this TED Talk that the presenter is a researcher, and he shows the research that he's done when they had people read an article about the environment, and they either framed it in more conservative ways of thinking, but about like purity and freedom and things like that. And when they framed them in those ways, people were actually more supportive, conservatives were more supportive of environmental policies after reading them in a way that resonated with their values, rather than explaining it in a way that like, this is the issue of equity and there's science and that's not going to work. You've got to find ways that connect with the values and fears of other people. Unfortunately, we're in a time when fear is a real motivator in human psyche, and we're at a time when it's being used to drive these divisions. So I would say, do try to talk to people who have different perspectives and experiences. But if we can, number one, listen first, listen to where they're coming from, listen to why they believe what they believe in the least judgmental way that we can. And then when you respond, try not to just respond in a way that is like facts and evidence and framing in the way that you see the world, but can you respond in a way that hears what was important to them and responds in kind? Not always easy to do.
No, it wouldn't be. Here's another question. Can Trump temporarily step down, like as if he were seeking medical treatment, to allow Pence to serve as acting president with actually, Pence just being acting president? Then Pence could issue him a pardon. Could that occur? I would imagine.
Could he issue a pardon while acting president? Well, I would say there would be legal challenges to that because it's never happened, so we don't actually know. But I think so while that could potentially work, but it also would potentially be challenged in court, if Trump just stepped down on January 19th and Pence pardoned him then, there's really no legal grounds to challenge that. So I think a more safe approach would just be the step down a day early. Now, who knows if, Trump will ever do that. That I am really interested to see, because he's so self-interested. So getting the pardon would be important to him. And that's definitely a much more legally sound way to do it than a self-pardon. But also it would mean that he resigned. And I think that would be so difficult for him. So I'm interested to see which part of his self-interest wins out there.
This was prevalent in the newspaper over the weekend. What has to be done to move Missouri from the red zone to a more mainstream political environment? Go about having conversations with people who don't think like we do.
I think that's an important part. So I had lots of talks about this over the weeks following the election, including with the National Women's Political Caucus, their Missouri branch, who is very concerned with that. Jason Rosenbaum and I did several talks on NPR, St. Louis Public Radio, about this. I don't think it's an easy answer. I think that so in some ways, Democrats were hindered a bit in our state and local races by our, what I think is the appropriate cautious approach to campaigning during a pandemic. But I think that we saw like Dev Lavender's race, she might have suffered by not doing as much door to door as Andy Koenig did. But so I think that there's some of that issue about getting into communities. So once we can physically be on the ground again, going and really being present. I look at the Georgia model, which granted they had a lot of demographic shift that Missouri isn't having, but what they had was a multi-cycle grassroots commitment to being everywhere, to getting everyone registered to vote, and to finding issues, not just the president, to your governor, your voting rights, things that resonate with those people, and using those in various communities to get them out and vote. I heard one of the Georgia organizers on a podcast recently say, we went to every county fair, everything. We talked to people. We were there for the local elections. We found ways to connect them to get excited about local issues and to run for local offices and then to build on that momentum. So it doesn't happen in one cycle, but I think we do have to not just worry about St. Louis City and County, but committed to being in the rural areas. I also think that, in some ways, when folks are so dug in, a way forward might be also the younger voters. What are Missourians doing, like with college Democrats? And to engage, we've seen like a little upshoot in Rolla of progressive groups and different areas like that. So, if you maybe aren't going to change the hearts and minds of more, older rural Missourians, but can you get the younger people who believe in climate change, who believe more in racial equity, who you might be able to find ways to connect with? So I think that those are some of the ways. We've seen that you can't just count on winning in the margins, large enough margins in St. Louis, Kansas City, and Columbia to win the state. So you have to be in outstate Missouri and find ways to connect. I grew up in Jefferson County, and I think about, my dad worked at Chrysler, and I think about the union guys who were Democrats because of their union and their labor interests. And now that those union jobs are gone, I can imagine those same folks, and that plant closed, are now those disaffected, non-college educated white male voters who have found a spark in Trump and have moved to the Republican Party. So can we reconnect with those people over labor issues, possibly?
Okay. Trying to be respectful of your time. There's one more really good question here I wanted to lob at you. Both Biden and Harris have avoided the question about stacking the Supreme Court. Do you have a clue as to where they stand on this?
I think Biden is an institutionalist, and I think he's going to really be hesitant to do something about that, because I think he's concerned about what happens when you get a Republican president and Congress in, and then they try to return with that. So when you say you're going to implement a commission on something, that's usually a way of putting it aside and not taking action. And that's what I suspect that Joe Biden is going to do. I don't expect him to pack the court.
There is a question from someone else wondering if your PowerPoint would be available. Is that something you can?
Yeah, I'll email you all the PowerPoint, and I can also send a link to that TED Talk I was talking about.
All right, that would be great. Then we can share that.
I'd be happy to.
All right, Elaine, would you care to do the rest of the honors?
I would.
Thank you.
And first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Manion so much for a wonderful presentation and preparation and the visuals and everything else. It was just outstanding, and we're very grateful to you. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next of all, we're moving on to Cynthia Miller, who has taken over for some years now at Circle of Concern. And as most of you know, although maybe not some of the newer members, Glenn Conan, our valuable legislative expert, was the director of Circle of Concern. For a number of years, we put on, and we will in the future, I hope, our winter auction to benefit Circle of Concern, and have raised a very nice amount based on all your generosity and the people who cooked, baked, made scented soaps, whatever, jewelry, whatever we did to raise money for them. This year, that is not possible, of course. And even though Cindy had done an excellent presentation for us a couple years ago, we thought it would be important to give her a forum to speak to you now before you wind up your end of the year donations and so on, and update you in this crisis situation, how Circle of Concern and their dedicated people and volunteers are helping a community that has a great deal of need. Cindy is the executive director. She joined the agency in 2015, and she has 20 some years of background in nonprofit areas in health and human services. And we'd like to welcome her now. Cindy?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for your year-round support as a group, and so many of you as individuals support us in a number of ways, and we very much appreciate that. The auction, the proceeds from the auction, of course, we look forward to having that every year, and we appreciate all the efforts that go into that. I am going to attempt to share my screen also. Let's see if I'm successful. Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah, okay. So we let's see, there we go. I know that most of you know us well, but if there's anybody new on the call, this is our building. We're in Valley Park. This is one of our vans that you might see around town. In normal times, we're driving around to grocery stores and picking up wonderful donations of fresh foods and so forth that the grocery stores have donated. Of course, this is a year like no other, so we're not doing that. Occasionally, we'll run out to pick up food that's been collected through a food drive. But anyway, there we are. Our mission is to feed the hungry and provide assistance to low-income families living in West St. Louis County, specifically the footprint of the Parkway, Rockwood, and Valley Park school districts, and now the 63026 zip code, all of that zip code, which is the Fenton area. We were missing some families. We were missing serving some families in that area because there are multiple school districts in that area. Most often we are helping mothers with school-age children in the home, seniors, those living with a disability, and those struggling with employment issues. And of course, that is one demographic that has really, really increased this year in light of COVID and those furloughs and businesses shutting down and so forth. We serve typically 650 families monthly, and we touch about 1,200 unduplicated households annually. Of course, those numbers have increased dramatically with the pandemic. In the first few months of the crisis, we saw an increase of just 50 families. In fact, our numbers were kind of low, and we were a little alarmed. And we happen to be part of an informal pantry coalition group. And we heard from other pantries that they experienced the same. And we think it's because those federal dollars really were helpful to families during those first months. And as those dollars and those benefits began to taper off, we saw the numbers climb. So April through June, we had 50 new families. July and August, we had 100 new families. And September, October, we had 200 new families. So clearly an upward trend there. You can imagine the stories and the different household situations we are seeing. So just a couple of quick current stories. One is a couple in their 30s. Both were working, not struggling, doing well. And with COVID, he was furloughed and her job was eliminated. Her hours were cut. She then got COVID and was in bed for 11 days. Then the husband got it. So all of that resulted in, they were in a pretty desperate situation. And we were able to assist them obviously with food, but also in helping with a mortgage payment. And that's because we have amazing donors in West St. Louis County. Another family is a gentleman who has a late stage ALS. He's in a wheelchair, and his wife was working in the food industry and she was furloughed. And so what you have are families who've never struggled, who were getting by and making things work. And then you have families that had struggle in their lives, and now things are really, now they're really, really hurting. So we were able to help the gentleman with a ramp to get in and out of his house because, again, he was in a wheelchair, and some other financial assistance and food, including some juice and Ensure, and some other things that he could take in with his condition. We are, of course, the biggest part of what we do is our food pantry. And a couple of years ago, we went to client choice, which is a best practice where clients would come in and choose their own groceries. It looks like a little market now. Folks could help themselves to fresh foods and personal care items. Most of these non-perishables come from food drives, and we raise dollars every year so that we can purchase fresh foods like the fruits and vegetables that you're seeing, milk and eggs, cheese, and some frozen meats. Now, due to COVID, we went curbside, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But some of the other programs that we offer, if a family is struggling with food, then they very likely need assistance in other areas. So case management, financial assistance, typically for rent and or utilities, to avoid a utility shutoff or an eviction. Scholarships are something that we're very proud of. It's been a part of our history since the beginning. And we have a very devoted committee that looks at these applications, and an eligible student could get a scholarship anywhere from $250 up to several $1,000s. And now those scholarships are renewable. We offer counseling, and this year through a grant from the Chiron Fund, we are able to grow that area as well, offering off-site counseling and up to 10 sessions. Circle will pay for that. School supplies, so our annual back to school program, summer opportunities, which are basically mini scholarships for summer camp opportunities, and then holiday programs, including a Thanksgiving basket event and a holiday adoption program. So in work, how do you work safely at a food pantry during this time? Of course, we're serving curbside. Our volunteers are wearing masks. When they come in, each person is taking a mini screening, including we take temperatures. We're doing intake and case management by phone. And thankfully now we have technology that allows clients to take a picture of a phone bill or other documents that we need to confirm who they are and what their income and other pieces of information that we need to serve them. And our staff has joked this year that it's the year of the gift card, because we have to continue doing what we do, but with fewer people in the building, because we're trying to safe distance. And a program like our back to school program would typically involve a lot of volunteers in tight spaces, sorting through all of these donations of supplies and then packing them up in backpacks and so forth and distributing them. We couldn't do that, so we used gift cards a lot this year. And so the families that we served that had school-age children each got a $50 gift card so that they could buy the supplies that they need. We found actually that families love that because it gave them some flexibility. If their backpack was still in great shape from last year, they could use those funds to maybe buy socks and shoes and other things that their children might need. Our holiday adoption event, we did a campaign. We raised over $100,000 so that we could give $50 gift cards to each client that we serve. And we had a drive-through event this past weekend and shared those. And again, families are just overwhelmed at this time. They can't believe, on top of food, that they're getting this kind of support. It's really a drop in the bucket when you think about what they're dealing with, but it does mean a lot to them to know that their family, that there are people, that their community cares about them. There's just some pictures. You all are seeing this, right? As I change screens, okay. This is one of our board members, and we had a local restaurant donate some food. El Toluca, if you haven't been there, it's a great, authentic Mexican restaurant. They support us year round, and they sent some lunches over for our volunteers. These are some students doing some sorting in our pantry. These are members of our staff running out to cars this was the first day that we launched curbside. We really had, it may seem like an easy thing to completely change all your programs and how you're doing them, but really it took some time to figure this out, how we would do it logistically. And it's a little bit more labor intensive, but I'm so glad that we are able to still continue to serve our families and to do it safely, keeping our staff and our volunteers and our clients safe. So Erlane asked me to just touch on ways to help. Tell others about Circle. You just never know who might need our help. And those who don't need our help might be looking for ways to help others. And so just spreading the word about Circle. Continue advocating for families in need as you do. You do it so well. And Glenn is always keeping us abreast here at Circle on legislation and things that are happening so we can respond. Cash donations are always welcome at a food pantry. And, you know, cash gives us flexibility to purchase foods that we need. We can buy in bulk and tax-free. And our donors can take advantage of the Missouri Food Pantry Tax Credit. So it's a 50% credit, up to, an individual can give up to $5,000 and get a $2,500 credit. You can give $200 and get a $100 credit. So it's a very simple credit program compared to others that are very, you know, multiple steps. This is one step. You make the donation, we complete a form and mail it to you. You fill in a few boxes and submit it with your Missouri taxes. And this year, through the CARES Act, you can, whether or not you itemize your federal tax return, you can claim up to $300 for a charitable deduction this year. So that's an added benefit through the CARES Act. Of course, planned gifts, stock, required minimum distributions, those are helpful. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to talk with you after. Food donations are helpful. We have a warehouse, and sometimes shelves of particular items will run low. And so, so food donations are helpful. And if you're more ambitious and want to coordinate a food drive, of course, we welcome that as well. And the only thing that we ask is that you touch base with us to let us know it's happening in case we get a call and confirm that it's a drive that we're aware of. We can share our current needs so that you're collecting the things that we actually need right now. And of course, we can't take expired foods, and we do offer safe contactless donations. You can put those donations right in your trunk and pull up to our warehouse, and we have some masked volunteers that'll run out and get those items right out of your trunk. So it's easy, and you'll feel good doing it. So thank you so much. I loved being a part of your meeting today and here learning more. I always learn when I partake in these meetings. This is our contact information, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, and if there's time.
Does anybody have any questions for Cindy? Okay, hang on a second here. There's at least one question. I did share the physical address for Circle, and you may also make donations through their website, I noticed. We have a question. With the changes due to COVID restrictions, do you have a need for volunteers at this time? If so, what is the best way to get involved?
The best thing to do is to give us a call. Stephanie Moreland is our Director of Volunteers, and she can talk to you about what our needs are right now and your availability. Right now, working in the warehouse or the pantry, if there is an opening, that's probably where we'd need you. I will tell you, it's labor intensive. There's running and lifting, and shifts are 3 or 4 hours. So so keep that in mind. Sometimes we'll need help with a mailing, and we might have some other things that are less labor intensive, but that's kind of where we are right now with the curbside distribution. Those are the what we need typically in the area of volunteers. Our address is 112 St. Louis Avenue. Of course, that's Valley Park, and the zip code is 63088.
Anything else? Anyone? Elaine, you want to unmute?
There we go. They have an excellent webpage that if you just even type in Circle of Concern, all the information will come up with, you know, contact and everything else. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is. And I'm hoping that a number of our West County Democrats will include Circle of Concern in their year-end giving. And if you do, and you're mailing a check in, put a little note in telling them that you're giving with the connection to West County Democrats, since we're unable to have our auction this year, so that Cindy and the people working there know that regardless of the pandemic, we're still supporting them as strongly as possible. And that tax credit, I did that last year. And as Cindy said, it's so easy. I just filled it out and gave it to my CPA, and a tax credit is better than a tax deduction.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much, Cindy. I'll turn
Thank
it
you.
back over to Karen.
Okay, thank you again, Cindy. Thank you, Anita. We appreciate both of you today. Very informative. I checked the calendar. Our next meeting is on Monday, January 11th. I hope that you have a very pleasant and safe holiday season. It will probably look a bit different than previous years, but do remain safe, and we'll see you in January. Happy holidays, everybody. Take care.